Yemen has recently become the new epicenter of military actions in the Middle East. Right now, Saudi Arabian forces are carrying out heavy airstrikes on military bases in Yemen. But interestingly, just 2 days ago, the Saudis attacked the forces of the United Arab Emirates in this country, who immediately announced the withdrawal of their troops from Yemen. And all of this sounds too complicated, because there are also forces in Yemen supported by Iran. These are the Houthis.
Tyran is poisonous.
In this footage, Saudi Arabian fighter jets are attacking a military camp in Yemen. To be specific, in short, a new conflict is flaring up in war-torn Yemen. The authorities of the large oil-rich province of Hadramaut, which is supported by Saudi Arabia, launched an offensive on Friday against the forces of the separatist Southern Transitional Council, which is backed by the United Arab Emirates. The government of Hadramaut intends to reclaim the territories occupied by the separatists in December. And in this episode, I suggest we discuss together what is happening in Yemen today and how 3 countries are involved in this story: Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Iran. And why? In the current confrontation, is the main goal of all the opposing forces essentially the struggle for the territories controlled by the Houthis. And why? Regardless of who wins, the Saudis or the Emirates, is Iran facing the same kind of humiliation as it did in Syria? That means their proxy force will simply be crushed and destroyed. My name is Alexei Pecci. Let's try to figure out this complicated, tangled story together. I promise I'll break everything down for you, but before we start, I ask you to like this episode and leave any comment under this video because it really helps promote the episodes on YouTube. I would really appreciate it, and please subscribe to my Telegram channel Pecci News. The link is in the description of this video. There we post breaking news as soon as it comes in. So, these days war has broken out again in Yemen. Let me start a little from afar. Back on December 30, 2025, Saudi Arabia unexpectedly launched strikes on the port city of Al-Mukalla in Yemen. Initially, it was unclear why the Saudis attacked Yemen, as they had previously said they were no longer involved in the civil war there. And China, let me remind you, even helped Saudi Arabia and Iran normalize their relations precisely because the 2 countries were supporting different sides in the war in Yemen. And then suddenly information appears that the targets of the Saudi strikes were 2 ships that had arrived from the United Arab Emirates, which delivered a large amount of weapons and combat vehicles to the forces of the Southern Transitional Council, supported by the United Arab Emirates. And now the Ministry of Defense of Saudi Arabia has made a statement, and I quote, "Considering the danger and escalation posed by these weapons which threaten security and stability, the coalition air forces carried out a limited military operation targeting the weapons and combat vehicles unloaded from the 2 ships. At the port, the military carried out the attack at night to ensure that there was no collateral damage." Immediately after that, Riyadh accuses the United Arab Emirates of escalating the situation in Yemen. They immediately denied the accusation and on the same day announced that United Arab Emirates military forces would completely withdraw from Yemen, but since then the war in Yemen has only intensified. And here, let's emphasize one important point. Southern Transitional Council, remember this definition. These are forces supported by the United Arab Emirates. Southern Transitional Council, Southern Transitional Council. This very Southern Transitional Council announced today that its opponents carried out airstrikes on 2 military bunkers, bases, and the airport in the city of Siyun. At one of these bases, according to the Southern Transitional Council, 7 of its fighters were killed. Although all sides claim to avoid escalation, the confrontation in southern Yemen has entered a new dangerous phase. Did the Emirates announce on Friday that they had completed the withdrawal of their troops from Yemen? The withdrawal within 24 hours was demanded a few days ago by the part of the Yemeni authorities supported by Saudi Arabia. The government of the Emirates stated, quote, "The United Arab Emirates has ended the presence of its counter-terrorism forces. We still advocate for dialogue, de-escalation, and internationally supported processes as the only reliable path to peace." However, as Yemen specialists now note, the withdrawal of the small number of Emirati special units will have little impact on the situation. Because the YPS does not intend to yield to its opponents and will not abandon its plans to re-establish the so-called independent South Yemen. By the way, we'll talk about the Houthis a little later. Let me remind you that the civil war in Yemen as a whole began in 2014. At the beginning of the war, the Houthis, who are supported by Iran, captured most of northwestern Yemen, including the capital Sana'a. Already in 2015, a coalition of Arab countries, which included Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, launched a military campaign against the Houthis, intending to help the legitimate authorities of Yemen regain control over the territories seized by the Houthis. At that time, Iran was actively supporting the Houthis, but later a truce was reached, and in recent years the front line has remained frozen. But the thing is, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates supported slightly different groups in Yemen. Their goals seemed to be the same, but still, each group felt that power had come into their hands, and they needed to use that power. And so, in 2022, with the support of Saudi Arabia, a coalition governing body was created called the Presidential Leadership Council, which included various forces opposing the Houthis. In other words, all forces united against the Yemeni Houthis. It seemed that finally, all the forces opposing the Houthis, who are supported by Iran, were brought together into one fist. But the United Arab Emirates were not satisfied with this situation because it was the Saudis who created such a coalition. And here, we fix in our memory the second definition, the Presidential Leadership Council. Now we already have the Southern Transitional Council and the Presidential Leadership Council. As a result, probably at the suggestion of the Emirates, this coalition soon began to fall apart. The Southern Transitional Council is formally part of it. It took control of a vast territory in the southeast of Yemen and declared that now the power there is under its wing. As a result, Yemen was split into 3 zones of influence. Part of the country is under forces supported by the United Arab Emirates, that is, the Southern Transitional Council. Part is under the Houthis, who are supported by Iran, and the third part is the remainder of the country. These are the territories controlled by that very Presidential Council, which is supported by Saudi Arabia. Thus, a new phase of the conflict began on December 2nd, 2025. The Southern Transitional Council, which officially aims to restore the independence of South Yemen, launched an offensive in the east of the country and quickly seized large territories. In the oil-rich Hadramaut and in Mahra, these are 2 provinces that together make up about half of Yemen's entire territory. Hadramaut borders Saudi Arabia to the north in the desert, while Mahra borders Oman to the east. The head of the Presidential Leadership Council, who is supported by Saudi Arabia, Rashad al-Alimi, declared the Southern Transitional Council's offensive a rebellion and stated that the actions of the Southern Transitional Council threaten a new division of Yemen. This raises the question, why do the Emirates need all this? Why are they supporting forces that are only fueling a new war in Yemen? And so, to answer this question, why the Emirates are doing all this, you need to look at the map. Today, the United Arab Emirates have access to ports in the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, but they do not have access to ports in the Indian Ocean. So, the United Arab Emirates, by supporting the separatists from the Southern Transitional Council, want in particular to secure access to ports on the coast of the Indian Ocean. They are prepared to support the Southern Transitional Council forces to help them seize much of Yemen, allowing the Emirates to fully control Yemeni ports. It's all very simple. Here, the Emirates staged a rather cheap show by withdrawing their troops from Yemen on camera. It looked impressive. But even if the United Arab Emirates really does withdraw all its military from Yemen, it won't change anything because the Emirates will not stop supporting the UPS forces. After all, the United Arab Emirates never really had any significant forces in Yemen. Since 2019, they have relied on special forces and mainly on their network of proxies directly on the ground. From outside Yemen, the conflict's current phase is largely viewed as the start of a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. But those who know the situation in Yemen well have long expected an escalation. Especially from the side of the UPS, especially since the UPS has never really hidden its plans. They just want to break off part of Yemen and take it under their total control. They say the Houthis have held control for years after breaking off, so they'll do the same. But here comes a very important point. Whichever force wins in Yemen in the current confrontation, it will definitely move on to counter the Houthis, who are supported by Iran, which is currently very weakened. Why do I say that? The thing is, let me repeat, in December the Southern Transitional Council took control of 2 provinces in the south of the country, which had previously been governed by the internationally recognized Yemeni government. And a little later, when they captured these territories, the head of the Southern Transitional Council, Idaras Qasem Abdul Aziz Azubaydi, stated directly, "Listen, we have captured these territories. Now it's time to launch an operation against the Houthis, who control northern Yemen, including Sana'a." Will Iran be able to help the Houthis in this situation? Probably not, because Iran itself is in big trouble. Basically, right now there is a struggle between the Saudis and the Emirates for control over Yemen. No matter how it sounds, I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.